Hi, welcome to Kidocracy at Large. I am Siddhan Chandra, the host of this channel, and will be addressing current events from kidocratic perspectives. Kidocracy declares the rule of the minors and minorities, and kidocratic education is taught by minors and minorities. And how do they teach? Through protests and movements, mainly. Examples are school strikes for climate justice, BLM, Idle No More, Me Too, March for Our Lives, and more. A group may be majority in numbers, but in terms of power, a minority. For example, the farmers in India are 60% of the population, but in terms of power, they're a minority. Today, I want to address the anti-architectural aspects of movements as different as the farmers' movement in India and the storming of the Capitol in the US. It is uncomfortable to be talking about both in the same breath. We support the peaceful farmers, already impoverished by decades of neglect and now freshly threatened by Modi's market-friendly, corporate-friendly policies. And we are horrified by the gun-toting right-wing militias who are supporting a mad president's coup. But the common theme of anti-architecture in both these movements need to be parsed to address challenges to global democracy. Modi passed the new agricultural laws without consultation with the farmers, ending the state-regulated agricultural system and opening it up for competitive global capitalism. And his rhetoric of Atmanirbhar Bharat, that is, self-reliant India, fueled this change. And the farmers marched on Delhi to teach the neoliberal elite what they want. The farmers' original plan had been to go to the center of Delhi, to the seat of Modi's power. But they were stopped and urged to occupy fairgrounds at the edge of Delhi as a precondition to negotiate. Refusing to be sent off into that limbo, as it were, they decided to stay and clog the roadways going into Delhi as leverage. Meanwhile, even during this standoff in the highways surrounding Delhi, the Supreme Court has greenlit a project that had been opposed by environmentalists and civil groups to build a new parliament building in the center of Delhi. Called the Vanity Project of Modi, this $3 billion project is going ahead despite the opposition of civil groups and environmentalists. This project also went ahead without any public consultation, despite a pandemic with over 10 million cases and unemployment at such rates that have not been seen in 45 years. Modi calls this new building the landmark of India's democracy and a witness to the makings of a self-reliant India. Here I want to quote George Bataille on architecture's inherent complicity with authoritarianism. Architecture is expression of every society's very being, but only the ideal being of society, the one that issues orders and interdictions with authority, is expressed in architectural compositions in the strict sense of the word. Thus, great monuments rise like levees, opposing the logic of majesty and authority to any confusion. Church and state, in the form of cathedrals and palaces, speak to the multitudes or silence them. It is obvious that monuments inspire social good behavior in society and often real fear. The storming of the Bastille is symbolic of the state of affairs. It is hard to explain this mass movement other than through the people's animosity against the monuments that are its real masters. The reference to Bastille is remarkable in that there was a guillotine left outside the state capital of Arizona. And it's not just symbolic, considering that 3 of the lawmakers contracted COVID during the storming of the Capitol. Dismissed as the deplorables by Hillary Clinton 4 years ago and represented by Trump, they are the product of years of neglect by the corporate-friendly Democratic Party. And not just by Obama's weak response to the recession in 2008, as Bhaskar Sankara points out in a very well-written piece in The Guardian. For decades, the Democrats have relied increasingly on wealthier, highly educated, and geographically cloistered voters. The trend has continued in the elections of the past year. Democrats just did enough to win power, but they need to construct a new coalition rooted in a much broader audience if they are to hold on to it. Biden relied on white suburban voters more than any other group to capture the presidency. Most worrying of all is that despite media narratives about a repudiation of right-wing populism at the ballot box, working class voters seem to have shifted rightward in the November general election. Trump not only won many white working class areas again, but he made inroads in Black and Latino ones too. Democrats cannot hide behind the rhetoric of the desecrated Capitol. A polarized country demands politics very different from business as usual. As a warning, for white suburbanites threatened by feral populations, it is worth seeing the 1972 film Deliverance. The villains of the piece are not the faceless mass of hillbillies that emerge from the woods to torment the 4 middle-class men, but the middle-class men themselves who live in a bubble of their own. A more recent film, Parasite, also warns of a class war without class consciousness. In both, we see a widening chasm between 2 populations that reminds one of the grim scenario of H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. A time traveler goes into the distant future to find that humanity has divided into 2 species. One that lives above the ground, idle and ineffectual, and one that lives below. And the one below is farming the ones above, breeding them, as it were, and harvesting as needed in order to eat them. Current polarizations of humanity are warnings enough. The question is, what are the new coalitions that we are going to build? What is the third space that is going to transform the already dreadful human relations, already under the stress of a pandemic, itself a phase of the climate emergency? New leadership and action are required to reinvent humanity and protect nature. New leadership that was evident during 2019, the year of anti-architectural movements, when children emerged demanding the rewilding of nature. 17 scientists from around the world are warning of dangers yet to come because of the climate emergency, and they advise as follows. Dealing with the enormity of the problem requires far-reaching changes to global capitalism, education, and equality. These include abolishing the idea of perpetual economic growth, properly pricing environmental externalities, stopping the use of fossil fuels, reining in corporate lobbying, and empowering women. These are far-reaching changes that require all of us to contribute. I am grateful to be videocasting from Toronto, located on traditional territories of Indigenous peoples and subject of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, a metaphor for sharing and caring for the land around the Great Lakes. Let the spirit of one dish, one spoon govern the way we will take care of our planet. Bye, and see you next Saturday.